I'm Professor Stephen Dyson.
And I'm Professor Jeff Dudas.
And we are two political science professors who have just watched episode 8 of Pluribus, the Apple TV series. Episode 8, Charm Offensive, the last episode before next week's season finale. What did you make of it, Jeff?
I thought this week's episode was a bit of a placeholder. I don't think it was bad necessarily, and I wasn't bored. I'm not sure how you felt, but
so in the arc of a season, the penultimate episode before a finale, it's not uncommon, or one strategy is you put a lot of stuff on the table that's ultimately going to be paid off in the finale, and that was my reading of the episode. You know, we learned a lot.
Right.
If you read the show in the register of this is something that's sort of really happening with these real characters, and there are real aliens who've really sent a virus and it's come to Earth. We learned a lot about the nature of what's purportedly going on. I know we've also been reading the episode, the show, or maybe predominantly been reading the show as a series of metaphors, allegories, you know, and operating less in a reality sense and more in a kind of ideational sense. You know, this was not an episode that did a lot to advance that ball, but in the lens of these are real characters who are facing a real situation, a lot was pushed forward in this episode.
I think that's right. If we imagine what we saw on the screen literally this week, then a lot happens.
Yes.
And we do learn a lot. You're right.
Carol learns a lot.
Carol learns a lot. There's a ton of exposition. Again, if we take everything that we have seen at face value, it also pays off a certain set of themes. The alien invasion one prominently. There's also the anti-communist theme, where that we get a lot of with the sort of the collective, you know, sharing of space to sleep in. Nobody owns anything, right? They're in sort of states of deprivation while they sleep because it's more energy efficient, right? And it's more productive in a certain sense. So there's a throwback to kind of old anti-communist themes, it seems to me, from the Cold War and maybe a little bit earlier. So those things are on the surface. And if we read those things as literal, then I think there would be good reason to believe that what we're getting next week out of the conclusion is some kind of resolution that introduces us to aliens or more to aliens and sets up some sort of, you know, charged political ideological battle between individualism and collectivism or communism.
Well, or also I think Carol has learned enough now that she's clearly planning a grand attempt to disrupt the joining, right? Like she's learned the nature of the communication amongst the joined, which I'd said couldn't plausibly have anything to do with people's electromagnetic properties because they don't stretch far enough. Apparently they do, and so
This is a little bit of a throwback to what Oviedo is doing, right, with the radio frequencies, and I think we had a commenter at one point who had suggested this as a possibility, that there's sort of radio wave kinds of technologies that are taking place. Somehow these things are being amplified. Maybe let's put it another way. We learn a lot this week about what the Pluribus thinks is happening. We don't get a lot of evidence that actually that their take is correct, right? So there is a sort of potentially interesting mirroring effect that's going on here. Carol has a theory of the case, right? She has a theory of the Pluribus, which we have come to find over the course of the last several episodes, or the last maybe 4 or 5 episodes. It has elements that are persuasive and correct, but also has elements that I think are wrong. The Pluribus can lie to her. We've seen that before. And they are not entirely sincere. We see that a lot this week, right? There's a lot of manipulative behavior that the Pluribus is engaged in with regard to Carol. Her theory of the Pluribus, it seems, is not quite right, but it's at least plausible to me that the Pluribus's theory of its case is not quite right either. That this is, you know, an alien virus. This has been sent via interstellar code, and that, you know, there is some beneficent set of beings out at, was it Kepler 22b?
Yes.
Who are sharing their gift with the world. I don't know that is particularly persuasive either. Right? They're certainly committed to this theory of the case in the same way that Carol's committed to her theory of the case. But I think we've seen elements, and I know you're going to expound on this, the Kepler 22b thing. I think we've seen elements that would suggest that there is some confusion alight here with our main characters.
Okay, so that's interesting. So the first of all, the Kepler 22b thing that's going on. I think there are allusions to other texts that might kind of shed some light upon this, because at one point Zosia says to Carol, you know, we don't really quite know what it is that's there, which is interesting because, of course, these are not transportations of alien beings into human souls, right? This is a transportation of a virus, you know, ostensibly a creation, or maybe the essence of the alien being, but not the transportation of alien individuals to kind of inhabit the flesh sacks of humanity. So even the kind of captured or joined humans are not fully certain of the origins of the thing that's captured them. But they do say we think it's like an ocean world.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting because that alludes to Solaris, the Stanislaw Lem novel in the Andrei Tarkovsky film. And hat tip to a commenter who did bring Solaris to our attention in last week's video. Solaris would be an interesting text here because what happens in Solaris is the planet Solaris, or the world Solaris, is discovered and investigated by humans, and they build a space station, Solaris Station, atop it, in orbit kind of around it. And they try to understand what's going on in Solaris, which is a water-covered world. So it's completely an ocean planet. And the ocean planet is completely resistant to any human understanding of what it is. So they try every form of scientific experiment and every form of hypothesis. They develop their own a new scientific field called solaristics, which becomes a series of dead ends. And a lot of Lem's book, the middle part, is this kind of intellectual history of paradigm shifts in solaristics, all of which lead to dead ends. And all that the ocean really gives the humans who study it back are reflections of themselves, or reflections of their subconsciousness. So it shows an astronaut a giant figure of his dead child, or it rather famously shows Kelvin, the central character, repeated facsimiles of his wife who'd committed suicide years earlier on Earth. And they can never quite figure out, is the ocean like a sentient ocean? If it is sentient, is this the way it's trying to communicate with them, by reaching into their thoughts and replicating them? Is it trolling them? Or is it just a mechanism? And it's just reflecting things because that's the nature of the mechanism, with no intentionality behind it. And so that's really, really interesting, both sort of specifically for the intelligence of the Pluribus, in that in one sense they are guileless, right? They can't understand art. They don't really quite know what Carol's doing, although they're a bit suspicious of her. Yeah. You know, they can't produce new things. They're sort of parasitic on existing human sort of knowledge and I guess technologies. So they're guileless from that standpoint, but they're also quite guileful from another standpoint, which is the standpoint of the self-replicating virus, and the virus that will just act in ways to kind of hijack its host and keep spreading itself, and that they're sort of spectacularly going to do that by turning Earth, or building on Earth, a giant antenna to keep replicating themselves in the universe. So there's that thing that's going on in terms of the literal way that the virus is working, or the alien intelligence, or whatever it is working within the show. There's that mirror with Solaris. There's also the broader question that Solaris was asking, and Tarkovsky in the film was really explicit about this, that Solaris was meant to show that humans shouldn't look outside themselves for explanations of their spiritual, political, social, and psychological malaise, right? That going out and trying to discover new things was not what humanity needed. I mean, Tarkovsky had produced Solaris as a riposte to 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which technocratic, scientifically minded humans went out to discover the secrets of the cosmos and found them. Essentially, in Solaris, they go out and do that, and all they find are reflections of themselves. And the grand conclusion is what humans need to do is reflect upon their own nature. And people knew this in the ancient past for Tarkovsky and have forgotten this in the contemporary age. And maybe that's the meta message of Pluribus. That's a lot to take from one offhand reference to an ocean world. Yeah. Maybe that's something that's going on in this episode.
It strikes me. So I think that seems pretty promising as a through line, or a kind of a meta theory of what the show is up to. It strikes me there are a couple of other texts as well that are maybe useful here. And the one is, you talk about Tarkovsky knowing this was something that the ancients believed. Well, I mean, the obvious reference point is the myth of Narcissus, and the staring into the pond and seeing only himself back. The other thing that comes to mind is, a lot of thought from the great modern director Werner Herzog, when reflecting upon the character of nature, right? His argument is that we imagine that wild animals care about us.
Mhm.
We anthropomorphize nature or animal life. And in fact, it's like that form of life is completely and totally indifferent to human existence.
Mhm.
And, this is a theme that he develops, Herzog does, in a variety of spaces. It's one of the sort of master themes of his movie Fitzcarraldo. It's the absolute on the nose theme of Grizzly Man. And so it's there's a way in which Solaris, it seems like it's quite likely the obvious reference text here, but it seems to point to a theme that has sort of deep roots when trying to make a commentary about how it is that human beings come to knowledge, right? And the point seems to be the way you come to knowledge is you interrogate yourself. You don't use others as other beings, other forms of life as some sort of negative mirror
Mhm.
against which you will then emerge in contrast. So I do wonder and imagine that there's probably that going on here.
Yeah.
The other master text, it seems to me, that we both had to do a little bit of work to dig into. Maybe we weren't the only ones, since we both had this idea to do it independently of one another. We both went in and froze the screen on Carol's whiteboard outline of the new Wacaro novel.
So it's surely significant, right?
Mhm.
That one thing that happens, that the core of this episode, it's happened in previous episodes, but the core of this episode is there's the literal peeling back of the surface layer of Carol's home to reveal that her writerly work of Wacaro and the great lost manuscript, although I'm sure she herself doesn't consider it the great lost manuscript, which itself is serving as both, I don't know, cover for and disguise of, and maybe parallel to
Yeah.
the discoveries about the Pluribus. And it's always been significant, I think, that Carol is a writer of fantastic fiction that is in which herself she is not literally invested, but is obviously a vehicle for her to work out some grander themes and ideas, although she's dissatisfied with the way that they're worked out. And so it surely matters that a writer of fantastical fiction is now the central protagonist in a story of the most fantastical fiction.
Yeah.
And the method of her piecing together the puzzles, both as a writer and now as detective protagonist, is to write down what she knows in this whiteboard series of bullet points and allusions and linkages and so forth. So that's the role that's playing literally within the
That's what
and
playing
maybe
literally.
figuratively within
and
the
when
show.
you looked at when you examine her whiteboard for the emerging Wacaro novel, there's a text that recurs, or a reference text, and it's Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. And Twelfth Night is all about deception. And it's all about the revelation of imagined gender roles, right? And the use of gender as a deceptive mode. Now, this is one of Shakespeare's comedies, so it's all done in a sort of a lighthearted manner. But it's a series of movements or moments of deception that revolve around gender reversals. So that is actually literally what's happening in the new Wacaro novel, in which Raban becomes a woman, right? And if you look at the whiteboard even more, there's lots of other elements of deception as well there, right? There's a reference to some sort of spice drug or space drug or something, which she says first, or she writes first, it's poison, and then say, actually, it's antidote, right? And it leads to a kind of a love potion or something of the sort. So there's these series of deceptions that seem to be both in the foreground and the background.
Something about shapeshifters in the Wacaro universe.
Right, right. And so, and that's kind of what's happening, it seems to me, on the literal surface as well here. It's a series of deceptions, right? That Carol is trying to deceive Zosia, that she's kind of coming around, right? And so this is I guess the charm offensive in one way, a reference to the charm offensive. On the other hand, it's a series of deceptions on the part of Zosia via the Pluribus to Carol. The whole scene with the diner, right, sort of gives away the show that this is, in fact, a body that is capable of manipulation, that is capable of guile, that is capable of deception. Carol does not ask for that diner to be rebuilt. They sort of prompt her to this in an attempt to manipulate her, I think, on one hand, into returning to the writing of Wacaro, which, I think they have some genuine interest in, but also because they see that as, that's what Carol should be doing, right? That's how she becomes the member of the Pluribus, right? When she commits herself to her role, they think, is as a writer of romance fiction. So they're trying to kind of manipulate her into this posture. There's deception happening everywhere, it seems to me here, in a way that is consistent with the sorts of meta literary and non-literary texts that we've been talking about. Maybe that's a way to read things, that there's a lot of head fakes going on maybe in this episode that are not quite literal, although I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and in the same way as the Waikaro and the quote unquote real world that Carol's living in are presented as things she understands through the whiteboard and things she can actually sort of influence, or at least collate. She can influence Waikaro and she can collate knowledge about Pluribus. Some things that she hadn't written in Waikaro. I mean, the two texts are starting to influence each other, right? Because you have here Raban, the sort of romantic lead of Carol's Waikaro fiction, was a male character, largely because Carol was making a kind of sop to mainstream tastes, like that would sell better than what she really thought, right? Which is Raban was a female erotic fantasy of hers, which the Pluribus then discovers, through their knowledge of Helen in particular, that it was always Carol's desire that Raban be a female, and they resurrect Raban or a facsimile of Raban, send her to Carol in the real world, which then has now influenced the new direction of Waikaro. And so you're right. There's lots of deception games going on here.
To cut you off, in the same way that they've tried to do the same with Minusus,
right,
by sending him his mother.
Right.
So this is a body capable of manipulation, of deception. And maybe Carol sort of comes to that realization at the end of this week's episode. I'm not sure, right? But I'm not sure that Carol has the personality to be easily influenced by new information.
Right.
Right.
Well, and neither does Minusus. And we're sort of bookended by quick shots of Minusus, a couple of which were sort of symbolic, I think, or symbolically important. Minusus's blood is dripping onto the hospital floor at the start of the episode, and it makes the kind of smiley face, which is usually the yellow kind of Pluribus smiley face, and it makes the happy smiley face of Minusus's blood, which at some point you're like, well, if his blood is making that thing, maybe he's going to get assimilated. But then two of the quick drops spoil the picture and screw it up. And then
By the way, sorry to cut you off again. There's a literary reference there to Alan Moore's Watchmen graphic novel.
Of course.
The first scene is almost it's raindrops there that mess it up rather than more blood, but it's the same.
Right, and it's what's his face's Rawcash's face. But the what else was I going to say? Oh, and the other thing that's going on is Minusus is being fed antibiotics to fight off an infection, and his body's kind of responding and is expelling the infection. Well, in some sense, Carol and Minusus are sort of human antibodies to this infection. They're resistant to it, and they're acting in ways. And obviously, this is where they're going in the finale. Is Minusus is all we really see of him is in the hospital, and then at the end he's traveling, and he's just 30 miles away from the United States-Mexico border, so he's very close to Carol at this point, and that meeting is clearly coming in the finale.
Yeah, so maybe we should, are we at a point where we should venture some guesses, some educated guesses as to what we're going to see next week?
Well, it's interesting.
Some predictions,
yes,
as it were.
Some predictions. So Minusus and Carol are going to meet. I think that's my prediction of one. It'd kind of suck if his car breaks down and he's left 15 miles away from you. The cliffhanger is, does AAA still work in the Pluribus? I mean, they would still have it. They'd come and fix that right up for you.
Yeah.
So there's that. Carol's obviously, she learned a lot in this episode that seemed to me to be weaponizable knowledge, or that's what she's searching for. So she learned about the means of communication between the Pluribus. She pushed them a lot on, is there a way that she can push an individual Pluribus member, in particular Zosia, into a reverie state that would disjoin them from the collective? And again, this is a very old kind of sci-fi theme in this kind of thing. There's, you find the one android and you give it a series of, I can almost hear Captain Kirk. Is it not the case, android, that if you follow rule 1, you cannot follow rule 2 because rule 2 would lead you to the, and it does not compute, does it? And then in the end you can kind of sever it from the collective and take over it. So I'm sure there's going to be an attempt to get Zosia removed
we've
from
already
the
seen that, right?
right. She has this moment of reverie.
Yeah.
We think after she's forced by Carol or invited by Carol to remember her childhood.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe maybe Manusas provides another piece of information with the radio frequency that helps in that process.
But then again, we also might find out that moment of mango ice cream reverie is itself a manipulation.
Yes.
Right. Because we have now seen really without question that they are capable of doing that.
Sure. So I think that's going to happen. Diabadi's got to re-enter the scene at some point, hasn't he?
Yeah, you would think.
Because it's been this three-hander.
There's a lot that one would think should be happening or needs to happen to conclude the season in a satisfying way. But I guess it is worth noting that this series has been renewed for season 2 already. And so I wonder how much resolution we're actually going to get.
Well, right. There has to be some grand attempt to disrupt the joining and some cliffhanger as to whether it's succeeded or not. Right? Or some great revelation. I mean, one possibility as a grand theory, we've ventured grand theories in the past. One was, which I'm not sure is going to be literally true, because it would be quite cliched at this point. The whole thing is a writerly fantasy of Carol's, but that's one theory we've thought about in the past. The other is, when you think about the purported origin of this virus and it being an ocean planet, and maybe it's the Solaristic mirror, and also the degree to which the show is taking up distinctly human allegorical themes of collectivism, individuality, so on and so forth. I mean, there's no guarantee that the origin of the virus is not earthbound. Isn't that quite likely, right? That there's some grand conspiracy that's earthbound, that's being deflected with stories of aliens.
Yeah, or it's just happenstance.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't be surprising either, right? The tendency of the human mind to organize random information into meaningful bits of data.
Right.
That could be what happened here. And it just turned out, unfortunately, for however many hundreds of millions of people who lost their lives, that this pattern actually did lead to something, right? So it could be...
Oh, this would be that if you put 1 million monkeys in front of 1 million typewriters, sooner or later one of them will write 12th Night.
Right. Yes. Which strikes me as, potentially consistent with this theme of the dangers of, I don't know, the dangers of the unwillingness of the human mind to look inside of itself and interrogate itself, and to instead search for grand theories to explain basically random outcomes or random circumstances.
Yeah. So that's a possibility. Yeah. I don't know. I think I think the show remains really, really interesting to me, because I can't imagine any one of those is true, but I can't quite figure out what it is. So, which is to say, it's kept the central mysteries are still quite mysterious or quite open. I'm not confident in any of these as literal predictions, and I'm also not quite sure yet which allegory or theme the show is definitively pinning its colors to. But I am confident that it's going to be an interesting one and a vivid one.
Yeah, and I guess my other potential point of prediction is that it feels like we're going to get a return to this question of the Pluribus attempting to turn the uninfected.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder if we're gonna get some sort of version of them attempting to extract stem cells. We know, it's been a kind of a common point. We've seen it in our comments, and I know it's kind of been traveling around the internet as well, right? The reference to how Carol had her eggs frozen.
So are they going to grow her a child? Is that
grow her a child? Maybe the egg has already been implanted in Zosia, and Zosia is going to be I thought that there was
Harold, I have something to tell you.
Yeah. I thought there was a kind of a side glance moment when they were standing kind of on the ridge looking out at the train going by, where maybe it was the camera, maybe it was my imagination, but I thought I got just a little bit of a peek of Zosia perhaps showing a little bit of a baby bump.
Oh, okay.
I may have just imagined that.
Who knows? Yeah. The train thing was also...
That's going to be part of what's happening.
Yeah, the train thing was also interesting, because Carol finds out they don't know everything about her. but also we don't, because she says, like, I really like trains. We also don't know if she's
lying.
I was going to say,
She's lying.
is she just making that up?
Yeah.
You know, and wondering how credulous the Pluribus would be. So she's implanting. There were elements in this episode of one of the central premises of Three Body Problem, another recent science fiction text, in which the protagonist discovers that the sort of aliens, because they communicate telepathically, they're open books to each other. So they not only can they not lie, they don't understand lying, and they don't understand strategy. And that's one thing that closed individual humans, the only thing that they have strategically over them, becomes sort of a central plot point. And Carol's kind of discovering a similar thing about the Pluribus.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say, and I don't know if this is definitely not a prediction, but the dogs again recur.
But they're not part. We learned crucial information. They're not part of the joint.
They're not part of the joint, and yet, I mean, it does strike me that dogs and dog-like creatures are playing some sort of meaningful symbolic role in everything that's happening. And again, I think we talked about earlier in the series that dogs have conventionally been, and light-colored dogs, and here we get, the dog in question is kind of a salt and peppery kind of, coated dog. And they, ordinarily, conventionally in human mythology, dogs play this kind of intermediary role between the living and the dead. They're gatekeepers of that pathway. And so, here they are again. And these feel like meaningful moments, but I'm not quite certain if they play a meaningful role in the neighborhood.
Yeah, they're also, taken more literally, they're also quite sort of heavily pro-social pack animals.
Yeah.
So they play that analogical role to what the Pluribus is doing. But again, this remains to me, presents to me, continues to present to me as a very sophisticated show that the most literal readings of are likely to be wrong. Now, we could, of course, be wrong in that, and I think it's still possible to read it literally and figuratively. And I think one reason I did struggle a bit with this episode was it seems to present itself so literally. And I think you're probably right that in itself is a sort of meta deception.
Well,
but we could just be overthinking.
We could absolutely be overthinking of it. Although I will admit, and I'll put the marker down right now, as we conclude, that if it turns out that all the literal things that we saw on screen this week seem to be substantiated next week, I will be disappointed.
It's just an alien invasion story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let us know what you think in the comments. We definitely need your help this week as in every week. This is a show that can support multiple readings and multiple interpretations. We've only been able to provide one or two, or maybe 1.5, because because of the similarities between us. We have a very narrow range of sort of human experience and expertise, and we'd love to broaden it by knowing what you think. So please do get involved. We try and engage with the comments as much as possible. Thank you for watching, and on that bombshell.